get. So this is a public meeting for the Vernon Hydroelectric Project regarding their application for Section 401 water quality. We're here to provide information on what's in the application, as well as Vermont DEC's process as we look to process the 401 and how the public can stay engaged in that process. Before we start any further, I want to introduce myself and then have the team introduce themselves. So I'm Jeff Crocker. I'm with the Stream Flow Protection Program, Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. We work on hydro relicensings across the state and issue the Section 401 water quality certifications, which we'll provide more background on as part of this meeting. Eric?
Sure. Eric Davis, you'll be hearing from me after Jeff kicks us off here tonight. Again, one of our principal responsibilities is issuing Section 401 water quality certifications, which we're going to walk through really what that means here in a minute or so. And yeah, if you could kick it over to Betsy.
Okay, yeah. So again, the purpose of the meeting is to provide information to the public on the Section 401 water quality certification process that we're running through for the Great River Hydros project. This one specifically being on the Vernon project. Provide an overview of Great River Hydros proposal and their FERC application, which is also our application that we're reviewing as part of the 401. And then invite comments and additional data that may be relevant to our review. Any comments you have tonight will be on the record for us to evaluate in our analysis and review of the application. This won't be the only period. As we walk through, Eric will give more details about a comment period being open for the next 45 days plus or so. So yeah, as a reminder, let's be courteous and respectful of people speaking, listen. And I think with that, I can turn it over to Eric, who can walk through this presentation. And then, yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Jeff. And I want to reiterate what Jeff just said. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thanks to everyone joining online as well. Thanks for that high-level overview. Before we get started, I just want to provide an outline for tonight in a little bit more detail. If you all have engaged in this process previously, it's probably through the FERC leading those meetings. There's sort of a parallel process here between FERC and then the state's role as a certifying agency for the Clean Water Act. For much of the process, really, FERC drives it, and then we're in a process now where it's the state's leading some of the process. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Then we'll touch on the major components of Great River Hydro's application as it pertains to the Vernon hydroelectric project, and discuss how we'll be analyzing that application, what sort of considerations we'll be taking into account, what the timelines are going forward, and then we'll open it up for discussion. This meeting is on the record in the sense that it is being recorded. It's a public informational meeting, though. It's a little less. Typically, we have public hearings where we've already issued a draft decision and we're just looking for comments on that decision. This is a little different in that it's a public informational meeting. We're really looking for input as to items that we should consider in that decision-making process before coming to a draft decision. So it's a little different goal tonight. Is really just we're going to keep it kind of short to try to hear from you all. So most of you probably well aware of this, but FERC is essentially the lead federal regulator in hydropower relicensing. They're an independent federal agency that regulates electricity, natural gas, and oil energy, essentially. They license hydroelectric projects, they do compliance and enforcement, and they do things like in the NEPA process, environmental scoping. There's a bit of there's interplay between the federal regulators and the state regulators in this process, which we'll kind of get at. All right, most of these meetings have been FERC meetings. What's DEC's role in this in this matter? Just to recap where we've come in the FERC process. I'm not gonna read all these bullet points off, but what we have up here is really the part of the process that FERC has led on. That really starts with a pre-application document, which begins the process of thinking about what sort of information is needed to assess a future proposal, and actually sets out what studies need to be conducted. In this case, case of Great Rivers projects, there were 33 studies conducted, and a final license application was filed in 2018, which is required by the Federal Power Act to be filed by a date certain. But really, all of those studies kicked off a consultation process between a host of stakeholders and Great River Hydro, and that led to amendments to that final license application, which has been before FERC for some time now. But FERC takes a look at all the information in the application, and then issues what's called a ready for environmental analysis. And that's really where the state's regulatory process kind of kicks into high gear. That and I'll get into that, just outline that for you all here. There's interplay between the federal body and the state due to the Federal Clean Water Act. So this is our landmark clean water law in the United States to make our waters fishable and swimmable. As many water quality issues as we have now, in the 1970s they were even more acute. And the goal was to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. And as it pertains to the state, this act set out obligations of the state, principally, as we look at the Vernon project. Two things that are central to the state's review of that are the water quality standards. So the Clean Water Act sets out that states must develop water quality standards. Vermont does this on a triennial basis, meaning every 3 years we look at our water quality standards and we make changes where necessary, and we send them to the EPA to review. The most important parts of the water quality standards, as it sort of relates to hydropower review, is really setting out goals for the waters. That's really designated uses, so things like aquatic biota or goals like fishable and swimmable. Sets out really broad goals for the waters, and then it classifies the waters to certain levels. And what that means is different levels of uses have different management objectives. What you want to manage a water to, And then below that, they have criteria, specific elements that indicate whether the management objective is being met, whether the designated use is being supported. So that's the background that the sort of the state looks at these projects through, and we'll come back to how it relates to the details of the application. But the other element of the Federal Clean Water Act is it requires any applicant for a federal license or permit. So FERC issues a federal license, which may result in a discharge to navigable waters to obtain a certification from the state demonstrating that it will comply with the Clean Water Act. So ensuring that a federal action also complies with state, essentially local, water quality goals. Must certify compliance with those criteria and uses that I referenced on the prior slide. It may include conditions, or certification may also, deny, which would prevent a federal license from being issued. And those 401 conditions become part of the federal license or permit. And we're all affiliated with Vermont DEC. Vermont DEC is the body that is statutorily charged with issuing certifications in the state of Vermont. So with that sort of regulatory background as to how the state interplays with the FERC process, let's move into the specifics of the project at hand. And you really can't talk about one without just mentioning that there's 5 projects going through relicensing concurrently. As a FERC does a NEPA process, so an environmental review pursuant to the National Environmental Policy Act, and they're looking at all of these projects at the same time. Obviously, there's 3 in Vermont, Vernon, which is the subject of our meeting tonight, but then Bellows Falls and Wilder as well. These are all individual projects, though, with individual applications. And of course, Vernon will be the subject of the discussion tonight. So apologies, the contrast isn't great in this room, but just to orient everyone to the project, I assume most folks are pretty familiar with it, but I'm gonna maybe I won't. I just want to stay close to the mic. So the powerhouse is on the river right side. So if you're facing downstream, powerhouse is on river right, and it houses 10 turbines, which when the dam isn't spilling, water is moving through the dam via the powerhouse. The other, a couple other aspects that are important is the fish passage infrastructure. So the main downstream is far over to river right. Then you have this fish pipe more central to the powerhouse, and the upstream fish ladder located on river right below the dam. Also, you see portage, viewing window, other public pieces of the project that can be utilized for the public, by the public for their enjoyment. So those are the main. These are big projects. Just wanted to orient everyone to sort of the infrastructure we're talking about. So before we get into the proposal, it's probably useful to just understand what project operations look like currently, because that's gonna play into I think helping to understand proposed operations. So this is just a graph of water levels in the North Walpole gauge. It was in a study request that we filed back in that early FERC process. So I just use that as something that's already in the FERC record. But really, what you see here is these increases in flow, or well, water level there directly, but flow as well, are generation events. And this is for one day right here. So there could be multiple generation events in a day. Generally see those events. The minimum flow is 1250. It's usually above that, but generally you see the events going from a lower flow to full station capacity, and there is the impoundment operating range is up to 8 feet. Typically, much less is used. 1.8 feet under typical operations, but that gives a sense of current existing operations. So in Great River Hydro's applications, for each project is a different operating mode. And first and foremost, that's really characterized by something that's referred to as IEO operations, or inflow equals outflow. So the inflow that's coming into the project is passed downstream, keeping the intent to keep a stable flow level during these IEO operations. You think back to that hydrograph on the prior page, the stated goal of these operations are to reduce the frequency, amplitude, and rate of change in project-related discharge and impoundment water surface elevation. So how that is actually implemented is that a stable water surface elevation is maintained at the dam, and inflow calculated at the dam is then passed downstream. So the intent of these types of operations is to stated there, but really to reduce fluctuations in discharge and water surface fluctuation. This is a table just for Vernon. It's translated to from the Exhibit E, which is supporting information for the water quality certification application. It characterizes a little bit of what this means as it's proposed, and in comparison to current operations. So I'm just going to focus on a couple of these figures here. But in 2009, in February, February in these graphs is the time where still the water surface elevation varies from that target most frequently. And I'll focus on June as well, which is where there's the least variation from that target water surface elevation. These years represent different hydrologic conditions. And what you see in 2009 is model data. So it's just trying to represent what the proposal would have looked like. In February, the water surface elevation is held within that target over 60% of the time, compared to 5% currently. 2015, it's 46% versus 20%. If you look at June, under the IEO flex operations, and we're just looked, this slide principally deals with describes IEO, but this table describes both IEO and flex. We'll touch on flex on the next slide. In 2009, it would have resulted in water surface elevation staying within that target range 100% of the time versus about 10% under current ops. And in 2015, IEO flex would keep the water surface elevation within that target range 96% of the time versus just about 31%. So distilling that down, the IEO flex operations would increase the amount of time that water surface elevations would be stable at the dam, and then it allows inflow to be passed downstream equal to what is coming in. So back to this slide for 1 second. So why the differences between February and June? And that touches on another central element of the proposed operations, and that's the flexible portion of the IEO flex. So this flexible operations, I'm simplifying it here, but it essentially allows for discretionary generation for the hours that are listed in the table there. You see December, March, February falls within, as we were looking at February in the previous graph. That's where the most amount of hours are proposed. In June, April through June, significantly less. That feeds into the June figures. Remember, on the prior slide, we were just looking at June, but those operations would be April to June. It's important to note, though, that while there is discretion, there's other elements to each of these events, which include constraints on the magnitude, the amplitude, and the rate of change of flows. So while a generation event may occur, there would be minimum flow provisions. The maximum discharge would be based on inflow. There would be a maximum drawdown level, and there would be up ramping and down ramping to address the amplitude of those events. So there's significant constraints that still come with flexible operations. Just touching on a couple of other elements at a very high level. Fish passage is another central part of Great River Hydro's applications. One element of that is operating the fish ladders at the projects from April 1 through July 15th to support early spring spawners. And there is also a fish passage agreement reached between fisheries agencies that would also speak to future fish passage measures. A specific element related to recreation for Vernon is that the Wantasticate Hinsdale Canoe Rest area would be included as a project recreation area, and that also a recreation management plan would address the current recreational features as well as that new recreation feature. So I think that is an outline. I think that's a good outline of the major elements of the application. We wanted to hit this at a high level. So there are other elements. But I want to come back to really what, we set out the water quality standards and designated uses earlier, but what does that really mean in the context of reviewing a hydropower application? And that means that we analyze compliance of the application, the proposed activity, with support of each of these designated uses, and also specific criteria: hydrology, temperature, dissolved oxygen. And I think it's worth highlighting aquatic habitat specifically. It's a very broad category in the standards. It not only speaks to aquatic habitat as you sort of might conventionally think about it in terms of supporting, habitat for species, but also overwintering and reproductive functions for aquatic biota, and river processes as well. So there's quite aquatic habitat covers a lot of ground, and in a certification, we would analyze an activity for it complying with each of these elements, and that's how it really feeds into the water quality certification process. Is there's a specific analysis of the criteria and how the activity complies with it. So, sort of, this slide speaks to the Clean Water Act. We covered the length of the Clean Water Act, Section 401 process, and this is, as I said, there's a little bit of interplay between the federal regulator and the state regulator. When we receive an application for a 401 certification, that's when we're really on the clock to come to a decision on a project. So when FERC issues that ready for environmental analysis, that was the last bullet point in that previous timeline. 60 days from that point, an applicant needs to file a certification application with the state. That's happened in this case. And then that starts a time limit for the state to act on that application. In FERC proceedings, the state has 1 year to act on a 401 water quality certification application. And then we'll conduct our analysis for compliance with the water quality standards. And then there's 4 outcomes that the states could come to in that process, which is to grant the certification, grant as proposed, grant with conditions. So grant and include conditions to comply with water quality standards, waive by affirmatively waiving the ability to certify a project, or certifying agency also waives by not acting within that one-time year clock. And the final option is the final outcome is a denial of certification. So Vermont DEC received Great River Hydro's applications for water quality certification on April 19th of this year. That puts our deadline to act is April 18th of next year. So that part is set in stone. What I'd like to conclude this slide talking about is really what comes next. And we're in the a public informational meeting that we're conducting tonight is not necessarily required, but we wanted to hold one to make sure that we were offering as many opportunities to solicit input as possible. We will issue a draft decision, which needs to have a 30-day public notice requirement with that certification, that draft certification. We expect to issue that draft decision in mid-November. This would be the next opportunity to after this window concludes, to provide comments, and it would be reacting specifically to a draft decision. We'll hold a public hearing to solicit oral testimony, tentatively scheduled for early December, and we'll review the comments, and we may make changes to the certification based on those comments, but whether the changes are made or not, a final decision will have a responsiveness summary where we respond to those comments. Might not be every comment. We might comments might be grouped together by theme, but that will be a part of the final decision. So that is sort of the process to come after we conclude this sort of a little bit more informal public information process and soliciting feedback associated with that. So we'd like to open it up now for comments. Comments don't have to come in tonight, though. It's would be most useful if comments aren't yet on the record. I mean, of course, share any comments you would like to, but we also, part of the FERC record is also part of our record. So if there are comments that are already on the record, you know, we're compiling those. Those are already part of the record for this project. There's a sign-in sheet that if folks have wanted to speak. Oh, it's just copy. It's check here. Copy if you want a copy of the draft decision. So no, there's a second chance here. Yeah, and then, like, you know, please share any oral comments tonight, but also you can send written comments or data, anything you'd like us to consider as part of the decision-making process to Jeff. I'm going to put his contact information up. And we're asking for feedback related to this process by October 1, so that then we have an opportunity to incorporate it in any draft decision that we issue. So I think with that, we can turn it over to the audience. Would anyone like to provide comment? Sure. Good point. Good point.
As we said, if you don't have it, by cards, having so October 1st, so get comments in, any comments or questions on process. Help with the process. So
yeah, the best way to get updates that meeting that we have to make sure and usually that's the best way we have this broadly shared information. If you have any, you can also just email to Jeff.
His email is on the screen now, but also cards available.
yeah, so we do have a website on DEC page that's dedicated to the relicensing of Great River Hydro projects with links to the application.
Can I, is it possible to share our website?
Yes.
In practice, you know, stated in the form, these websites can be challenging. If we do have issues, please email one of us, we're happy to. But state bill protection, that's our section for the rivers. If you go down here, there's a special kind of good area that we're going to do for one. Provide free background. These are the individual for the project overview, the 4-hour process. These are the information that meetings started for today. So the other next steps that have to take place. The link to the FERC library. So that's the record that Eric was speaking to earlier. So all of the library, we review those, we read those. It's also a place where you can maybe finalize the application.
Can I just add to that? If you click the 401 applications, there should be hyperlinks to specific documents that are part of that record in the FERC library. So you don't have to. It can be pretty daunting, especially with projects with a fair bit of records. So yeah. No. So that's in there. Great question.
Can you talk a little bit about because Great Riders apply to both Vermont and New Hampshire for 401. When those 401s are issued, like what happens with those in terms of is one take precedence? Like a lot of people believe that the entire river is in New Hampshire, so they think it's really New Hampshire's decision. So we're just talking about the
You want to take this?
So the trigger 401 has to decide the state. The line in between New Hampshire and Vermont, the low median mark of the river. Each powerhouse has a discharge in Vermont, and so therefore, we do have jurisdiction in Vermont. Vermont, New Hampshire, and Daniel is from New Hampshire DES is on teams, but we will coordinate between the states, actively talking about what those conditions are. The most constraints, there's some like would be like we're not exactly the same, would be the most the one that's the most constraining would be the one to care. The condition, I believe, within the park.
Most protective.
Yeah. Right.
And there is a Supreme Court case that goes back to defining the
Right.
jurisdiction between Vermont and New Hampshire as it pertains to the Connecticut River. So yeah.
So yeah, and I think there may be some process that we don't know. Issue a 401. There's a EPA review whether, and typically that's no. There isn't going to be an effect for Vermont or inland, but with a border water, there could be for different during EPA. That's in the 401.
Yes.
Is Vermont and New Hampshire on the same clock? The issue of 401?
Essentially,
there may be a
there's
day, but we're essentially on the same.
big picture wise, yes. I think there is a small timing difference, but essentially, yes. Sure.
So in one of the slides previously, you had talked about the proposal from River Hydro for the Vernon Dam. You mentioned the flow and the fish passage and recreation. Are there any other, are those just a sampling of what was in the proposal, or are those kind of the broad, that's what was in?
I would say those are the major elements of the applications. There may be other elements that we didn't quite capture completely because they are there's a lot to the applications. So we did try to capture it at a high level, but those are the major elements, I would say.
And I think those are some of the most There's a proposal to FERC has other elements that are process.
Thank you for being here. So I have a couple of questions. So,
Sure.
I have heard that there's erosion that happens in Vernon caused by the operations in Massachusetts. Would Vermont look at that?
So you're referencing a road that's being caused by the Northfield. Falls.
Northfield, I believe.
So the trigger for jurisdiction for us is for section 401. The discharge for those projects is in Massachusetts. So those are going through the Massachusetts 401 process.
Okay, so.
However,
Vernon
that-
should tell them.
So- Yeah, Massachusetts would be the one who's processing 401 for what I was kind of mentioning before is there's this EPA process after is if your water quality certification affects another state, there may be a determination by EPA to open up to that. But that process is not something we have gone through, so we can't really speak to it.
It's a branch.
Yeah.
Massachusetts.
We can, if you provide, send me an email, I can send you, the people who are, working on the 401 down. Massachusetts.
Then I have a different question. Do you want? You'll have time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So then, is there a map of the ultimate area of that the jurisdiction is? Like, I'm asking about the Creek Meadows and West River, because
Okay.
they're impacted by the dam. I mean, the meadows are created by the dam.
Under,
Yes.
yeah,
Well, in existence.
right. So we'll review the impact of, or potential impact. So, proposed operation. Water level. So that we will see less of a fluctuation. That is the
No, it's just the concern, my concern is to improve recreational opportunities in those areas.
Okay.
And the meadow, I don't know if you're familiar with the meadows in Brattleboro.
a little bit.
I mean, it was meadows, but then when the Vernon Dam was created, it flooded them, and it's 4 feet deep, and it's a really pleasant area that people use for ice skating,
Okay.
boating, and then the West River is wider because of the dam. It's not, can't imagine it. It's not going to be in its original
Right.
area, so that would just be a great place for recreation.
Okay.
And wildlife is, yes.
Don't have a great map handy, but what I would add to that is that the studies that took place, the 33 studies that we had mentioned, those did include elements that looked at sort of water levels and in how the main river channel affected water levels and tributaries and so forth. So, obviously those studies took place under, the current, existing conditions, but they were, there is data from those areas to bear on the application.
And the previous license included a boat launch at the at Retreat Farm as part of its recreation. The previous license, not the.
The
I don't know.
1979 license?
Yeah.
Okay. You can
Thank you. We'll
Thank you.
take a look at that. Yes.
The lady was about the erosion caused these of water by the field. And how we going to approach that? If there was, detriment to the riverbanks in Vernon, does this require Vernon to file some sort of a suit?
Well, I mean, I guess in terms of addressing it from the process to engage section 401 process, that process for Northfield, because of where discharge into the river is in Massachusetts. So we have to work and communicate with the Massachusetts Department of, I think, Environmental Protection. And I do have their contacts of who's working on this project that I can provide you, and work through a similar process. They, I believe, are going to have public information meetings in it may be sometime this fall. They're going to have similar ones, and they have a website up as well that's providing information on their process and when they're scheduling public information meetings. And we can, I can provide you that information.
Well, it's damage.
Right,
Well,
right.
there's
So
probably an effort to, contain
you're right.
the damage.
Yeah.
So, yeah. having the information would be helpful.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. I do think the primary, means of communication is you probably should plug into that process. As Jeff was saying, the regulations for certifying a hydro project have changed a couple of times recently. And in the most, Clean Water Act hasn't changed, but the instructions as to the federal agencies how to implement some of these things have changed. And as part of the most recent regulations, I think the coordination between neighboring states has enhanced. So what that looks like, in terms of EPA, maybe asking Massachusetts to consult with Vermont. I'm not exactly sure what that would look like, but that there may be an opportunity for that. But I would encourage you to plug into that process, because the Massachusetts regulators are going through a similar exercise related to the applications before them for the two projects.
And are you Madeline? Okay, I'll send you an email here following up with some information. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be good because I'm an expert. These guys. Maddie, so as an organization, we're also engaged in those projects. Similar information that Jeff provided in terms of how to get involved and how to come in.
Well, I'm going to be giving all of this information. Of course, I couldn't be here tonight.
Oh, okay.
I will also tell her to get involved.
I'm just for the record, and I think like you guys probably know our concerns with hydro, but you mentioned the studies. The studies were focused on how the company's been operating for the past 40 years. So one of our major concerns while we're in absolute support of the operational change is there has been no studies to actually look at what that means for flows in the river, for sediment transport in the river, what that may mean for phosphorus that's attached to that sediment, how it may move out of tributaries, what that may mean for how sediment moves and impacts habitat. The studies were really looking at how the projects were operating, and there does not seem to be any analysis for what may occur with the operational change. So that's certainly going to be some part of our comments in the process, is feeling like it's, as someone we spoke to said, it's a pretty grand experiment. We consider all of the facilities on a large scale to be changing the flow in this way without really understanding what that means, what that's going to mean for sediment transport. So questions around that. And then questions around recreational access. And similar things. So for instance, in Vernon, the main area you can access the river is right below the dam. And this is one of these things where I'm not sure, there's where the hard line is around water quality standards, but when you think of the designated use of possibly boating or swimming, there are safety concerns and public notification concerns around understanding what the flows are coming out of the facility. And so it's also with this shift in operations, what does that mean for how people understand flows, how they get access to flow information? So some of those recreational access questions are another thing that we have been concerned about, that we will be, looking at and taking in submit comment.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
I'm sorry,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Please do.
Wendy Pearson, also, I'm a state senator.
Thanks.
Okay.
So this were Kathy's comments made me think about just how things have changed. The weather patterns are changing, right? We're having more rain.
Certainly.
So
Certainly.
that's
Yeah.
gonna happen. Our new normal. So that's obviously gonna impact the river.
Yeah.
Are you able to include that in the analysis?
Well, I mean, if we know the river's changing, their operation is inflow equals outflow. They're going to be passing what's coming in. These projects, have capability of passing X through, the gates and managing the river in a way with coordination of other dams. That is still part of their proposal during high flow events. So that's still part of what's being proposed by Great River, is those high flow operations. Yeah,
So
yeah.
the river dams that are.
All that coordination, I'm not going to pretend to understand, but Great River, as part of their proposal, is proposing to continue their portion of those procedures operations. Yeah.
That seems to be working well.
Yeah, and that was one of the elements where we at the high level, we didn't include it in there, but that is included as part of
Yeah.
the application, these
Yeah.
high water
Yeah,
operations.
and obviously, the last couple Julys, we've been dealing with high water, which we've never had to deal with before. So,
I can speak to that a little bit on the director of operations. He talked to Army Corps almost every hot water. What their plans are, trying to coordinate with us so that they help us as much as they can, and we help them as much as we can. So that's really exactly what I'm there, and we helped them this morning.
Great.
Setting us up for Friday.
Yeah, and that's what I heard from them, is that they coordinate with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that relationship has actually grown a lot. We talked to them a lot more in the last 2 years than we have. So, just to your point, the dynamics are changing.
Thank you.
And under those certain, that's. Related to program, we do that, excuse me, so for dry years and wet years for different seasons, so we do have that. So it won't be, probably extremely severe.
Thank you.
It does make me wonder though about the number, like, so for the floods in last July, and I'll express this correctly. At the Bellows Falls Dam, certain gates were released.
Stanchion
And
gates,
then in order to put those back in, there had to be a pretty significant drawdown. So I wonder about when you consider the level of flooding we may be encountering over the next 30 years, whether the number of drawdowns like that would have to be increased, whether there are some parameters or considerations for what maybe needs to be done in those circumstances. And part of what's coming to mind is for the First Light projects, they draw down the canal every year for maintenance. And we've been working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to actually bring volunteers into the canal to save sea lampreys and other aquatic species in there so that they can be, put back in the water. So that was one of the things when River Hydra had to draw down around Eric's Cove last year. That as an afterthought, I thought, oh shit, like maybe something could have been done to actually not desiccate. So I would imagine maybe there's a consideration there too on the plan to manage those in a particular way.
Yeah, I think can't really speak to, I know they don't want to trip those boards. So they trip them, it's basically gonna draw down the pond regardless, because they've got to build them back up. They have nothing to hold back the water. They can only put so much water through their, I think it's the roller gates there at Bellows before they have to trip those to get extra capacity. It's just some of the events that we're seeing are so much higher than we've seen in the past that it's, unfortunately something that may occur.
So it's like, if something happened,
Yeah, I don't, create a process. I have a clear answer to that. And it's not when you lose the gates in the flood, right?
You're
Like
thinking,
there's a public safety issue
Yeah,
that's going on.
yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about the drawdown occurred
Well,
well after that in order to replace the gates.
Yeah.
So it's a very controllable moment to a certain extent.
Okay.
And so it's what can be done in those drawdowns.
Okay. Yes.
Building up what Kathy was saying, sort of, I don't know if one of the things could, in the certification could be if the company that owns the hydro, whichever company that is, in the future, it's like the hydro, but if they are planning upgrades, right, to those gates, could there be something installed to make them more efficient or better in water flows? Like, I'm just trying to think, like, I don't know enough about how the operations work to know what kind of thing to suggest. But I'm just thinking, all right, well, these things are all been built at certain water level experiences. And we're getting, and as we look to the next 30 years, we're thinking, oh, it's going to be increasing. So, you shouldn't just keep everything, and I think regular hydro would want to keep everything static, right? We want to be planning for these higher flows, because it doesn't do them any good to have to replace them and put the gates back in, but some new technology or whatever, could there be something? I'm not expressing it well because I don't know how it works, but I'm just thinking we can't just always say, well, there's always going to be high level events. Well, yeah, we know there's going to be high level events. So in the next 30 years, when something's proposed, could other stipulations be put in to lessen the impacts of that?
Okay.
Maybe that was a better way of stating it.
Yeah.
I think we hear you. Thanks for capturing that.
I think Ellen was ping pong effect. I'm just thinking of the recent floods and the farmers up the street. So, similar to like notification or regular notification, I could also see, some of the farmers have expressed to us, like, if they just have a little bit of, they could get like their bees out of their field or their tractor out of their field. And I don't have no idea, the volume of floods we're having are like well beyond what dams can do. But I do think the company has, can make a better guess than the rest of us at what water's coming through, at what rate and when. And so if there's any way to like notify adjacent landowners of, impending flooding, that would be amazing. But again, just not sure that falls in the water quality realm or if that's.
That might be emergency maintenance.
And the state's looking at those coordinations now. They need to be better. And the Army Corps does connect with law enforcement, but I don't think that's a good enough way to connect. But that's a really good point. We're at that. It should be in meetings.
Yeah, I would just add, spring readiness radar, right? We address this issue and concerns in our comment. So I refer to the comment, but in general, just for this audience, to your point, there are agencies that do the forecasting. We rely on forecasting just as much as a farmer. We don't forecast. We rely on the airport. So, and those are easily on the website or instantaneous or whatever, the river forecast.
Yeah.
The NOAA
So
service.
yeah,
National Weather
we
Service,
use
yeah.
that just
Yeah.
as a farmer. We don't create.
Yeah, I was unsure whether those are available for.
They are,
They are.
Yes.
right. Northeast River Forecast. National. Yeah.
And they project.
Yeah.
Every town has an emergency. And we just would need to link into the bulletin site for notification.
I would add that we do in our emergency management feature, hot water system. Mostly, when we have to rapidly increase flows again by opening a gate that like almost wide open, we have a criteria for what that is. We do notify them. That's sudden That's part of our
EAP.
EAP. Emergency. But that's a small, it's more about the increase, right? They wouldn't see it naturally, right? You know, a rising flow, suddenly jump up 8,000. Affected areas that are immediately.
So John, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a perfect.
Yeah, it's not a requirement for them.
But the-
For us to do that. It's pretty broad. We've just sort of incorporated that. I mean, I'd say FERC might not require somebody to do that in some circumstance on dam somewhere, I don't know. But we do that as part of our own procedure. Notifying when there are significant rapid changes. We are controlling by an open favor, tripping stamp. That's or something. You wouldn't know.
Any other questions, comments?
It's not forever hold your peace.
Right.
There's all of our contact information there. And again, it's October 1st. To submit any comments or data that you would like us to take into account in advance of a draft decision. Thank you. Good point.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good
thank
job.
you very much.
Thank you for coming and engaging in the conversation. Appreciate it.
We are in White,
Well,
well, it's Wilder. We in Wilder and White River Junction. Yeah. Here you go. And then on Thursday, we will be in Bellows Falls.
it's like put in your phone, the technology center. There's a small parking lot there. It's adjacent to high school, which has a larger. Yeah. It's right next to each other.
It is.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
On Thursday. Yeah, 5:30 for 2 nights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.